For this painting, I begin by creating a grid system using a diagonal line to extend the aspect ratio of my source image. With this manner of grid system, I'm able to create a grid that will properly adhere to the correct aspect ratio of the source image very easily, without extensive measuring and calculations. This method of gridding is built around a dissection of the image into 128 equal triangular sections, but you could divide the image into more or less sections if you choose to. You could also subdivide a particular section of the grid to better translate detailed information. For more information on using this grid system, please refer to my video on creating grids. Once my grid is established, I begin my painting by using thin washes of acrylic paint. I could achieve the same product by using thin washes of ink, watercolor, gouache, or oil paint. The reason that I'm using acrylic paint instead of oil paint is that acrylic dries at a much more rapid rate. So, I will be able to use my oil paint for glazing a full day or more earlier than I could if I used oil for my underpainting. Once my underpainting is established and completely dry, I can begin the glazing and scumbling process. This painting is meant to be an abstraction through magnification, the idea being that I am examining a real object so closely that the reality of it becomes abstracted. This painting, if you can't already tell, is an image of paint on my palette, with a glob of paint in the foreground that is in very sharp focus, and everything outside of that depth of field has a soft focus, or is out of focus. This is essentially what makes this manner of painting the most interesting. By playing with the focus, I am creating visual diversity and applying some of the advantage of using a photograph to the painting process. Here's the rub. Painting something to appear out of focus is one of the most difficult things to paint. So, the closer you get this in your underpainting, the easier it will be as you move along to the next stages of the process. The indirect painting process was established before the development of oil painting, back when egg tempera was the dominant medium, in the Proto-Renaissance and earlier. The original technique was developed to make the most out of the pigments, which were expensive and labor-intensive to develop. So instead of building up the paint in a direct method, as we likely would today, artists of the past would create an underpainting using an ink wash that established all of the values for the painting as accurately as they possibly could. Once the ink wash was complete, artists could glaze the egg tempera over their surface, which already had the values put in place, but lacked color. By using transparent glazes, artists were able to make the most out of their expensive pigments, and when oil painting was developed, it was used in much the same way. But where egg tempera dries almost immediately after it's applied, oil paint allows artists much more time to adjust their work, which is why artists began to incorporate it into their practice to a much greater degree, and eventually why oil paint became the primary painting medium among artists, and there it has remained for the last 600 years. So, by working in this manner, you become connected to the history of painting and all the paintings of the past, and you can see how this method creates a rich visual surface that is very distinct from the direct method. Indirect painting leans into transparency, and direct painting leans into opacity. And most artists use some mixture of these two methods. As I progress into this painting, I will use both methods, but only after I have established a solid base of indirect painting. My go-to method for this painting is to put a thin, transparent wash over top of an image. The key to doing this is making sure that I use enough medium to ensure that the consistency of the paint is properly thinned enough. It should resemble a watercolor paint film. When I cover a small area with a singular color wash, it acts as a glaze in the lighter areas and a scumble in the darker areas. I will then wipe away that color which is too dark with a cotton rag, and I will either wipe away the wash or actually add paint to the areas of scumble. After this, I will work other colors into the wet glaze to build up the darks and establish the finished piece. As I proceed further into the painting, I begin using more opaque paint mixtures. This is because in some areas, I didn't do a good enough job in my underpainting because I was impatient or I'm trying to emphasize the soft focus qualities of the source image. I allow some of the opaque paint film to remain on the surface of the painting, and I will remove other parts. The residue of the paint left behind adds subtle variation to the surface that is imperceptible in a photograph, but visible when viewing the painting in person, and adds to the overall effect. By creating a push and pull of opacity and transparency, I'm adding to a rich conversation happening between the formal attributes of the painting, such as the push and pull between light and dark, cool and warm, sharp focus and soft focus. When there are variations in technique and approach, the painting becomes far more engaging visually.